Welcome to the Society of Professional Journalists video on editing for print and online. In this video, we'll touch on the basic elements of what you need to make your writing better and what will make you a better editor. Let's get started with former Arkansas Democrat Gazette editor, Sonny Albarado.
Editing is a process by which we select and prepare writing, photography, visuals, audio, and film media in order to convey information. The whole idea is to get it in a form that's consistent, that is accurate, and that conveys the meaning intended by the author. Editing assures accuracy and fairness, and editing provides feedback to the writer and the editor. That process of engaging what the writer has written and what the editor does to try to fine-tune that writing. So let's say you've just been named an editor for your school paper. Wow, what do you do now? I became editor of my student paper in college, even though I had no previous experience in editing or journalism. My only qualification seemed to be that I was a B-plus student who had an English major background. I got lucky because I had a couple of really good mentors, a managing editor who had been on the newspaper staff the previous 2 semesters, and an advisor who had recently graduated from a respected journalism program. From them and from others, I learned the difference between news writing and writing for essays for my classes. They also taught me that being an editor didn't mean just telling people what to cover or how to write. They helped me see that an editor is more than just a newsroom leader, that an editor, especially on a school newspaper, is a coach and a colleague, someone who learns from fellow journalists while coaching them to be better writers. Editing, in this context for this session, applies to reporters as well as those who edit their work. After all, the writer is the first editor. All writers who strive for clarity, who want others to understand them, should edit themselves, rewriting as needed. After writing an article or story, they should reread their work, correcting grammar and punctuation as they go. They should also be on the lookout for sentences written in the passive voice and ask themselves if using active verbs will improve those sentences. They should also look for ways to tighten or shorten their copy and consider breaking complex sentences down into more than one simple sentence. Here are a couple of quick exercises on grammar and word usage. I'm not going to read them directly to you. I think you can see them quickly for what they are. First one, of course, determines whether or not you use a impersonal pronoun or a personal pronoun. This next one challenges you to decide whether you use a singular or a plural verb in the context of this sentence. And in this one, it asks you to correct the wording to make sure that you're using the correct word. This one calls for punctuation knowledge. Here, you have to decide whether a hyphen is needed. In this case, hyphens are needed in 2 locations because of compound modifiers. Here's one that asks for punctuation in a direct quote. Of course, you need an opening quote before the quote itself. You need a comma after family and a closing quote before the attribution. In American English, periods and commas always go inside the quotation marks. An Associated Press style deletes the comma in the series Cooking, My Dogs, and My Family, deletes the comma before the and in the series. I'm not going to get into the controversy over the Oxford comma, which requires commas after every item in a series. I suggest you use common sense. There are some times in a series where the extra comma would help understanding and comprehension. Macro editing. Macro editing refers to the higher functions an editor performs. This is editing that seeks to make sure the writing will appear in the newspaper or online following accepted style. Usually this means adhering to the Associated Press style book recommendations, although there are other style manuals that some organizations use. You may have heard of the Chicago Manual of Style, which is one adopted by most news organizations in the Chicago area. Many larger news organizations have their own style manuals for language and usage peculiar to a specific state, locale, or region, or endeavor. Some style rules can seem downright silly, but must be followed anyway. For example, I once worked at a newspaper that prohibited the use of the word vomit as either a noun or a verb. The style book instructed reporters and editors to use throw up or throw hyphen up instead. That was our style, and it was dictated by our editor. That's the way it goes. What is style anyway? It's just a consistent way of writing things, making sure that we all have an agreed upon way of presenting information and writing sentences. The AP style book is the common one for newspapers, as I mentioned previously. It provides style guides for capitalization, how you abbreviate things, how you use numbers, how you use titles. For example, the Queen or His Honor, how you use dates, what format do you use dates, a lot of stuff like that. The AP style book has chapters on business, on food, on military terms, sports, religion, and punctuation. Here are a couple of quick style exercises. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on them, but how do you spell Super Bowl? What's the proper style? Super Bowl, 2 words, uppercase on super and bowl. What's the proper AP style on T-shirt? Well, they prefer a capital T hyphen shirt. And of course, photocopy. Photocopy can be used as a verb or a noun, not Xerox. Xerox refers to a specific brand. It became part of the common usage when Xerox company was the primary or only manufacturer of photocopying machines. Hence, you often might have heard somebody say, "Go Xerox this for me," not in writing. You should know, of course, that lead, L-E-D-E, it's a journalism jargon phrase, refers to your first paragraph, the first paragraph of your story. Essentially, a lead, as a wise editor once told me, represents you, the writer, extending your hand to the reader and offering to take them on a journey. Of course, another wise editor once said to me that a lead is you grabbing a friend by the shoulders or shirt and saying, "Let me tell you what just happened," or "Let me tell you this crazy thing." In any case, your first paragraph is usually your only chance to persuade the reader that you have something interesting to convey and that they should continue reading. This applies to all stories, not just hard news, features as well. Every subsequent paragraph and sentence in your story should further your goal of getting the reader to keep reading. Keep that in mind as you edit a story, whether it's your writing or someone else's. Ask yourself in a lead, what is the most important or most interesting thing about the story or the event you covered? That's what you try to convey to the reader. One way to help you get to that point is to write a headline or a tweet that helps you focus on what that most important or most interesting thing is. Of course, keep an eye on how long that sentence is. Remember, you should try to keep sentences to a single thought. If your lead approaches 30 words, an old rule of thumb, then you might be getting too long. Always strive to use powerful verbs and avoid starting sentences with the words there or it. That almost always leads you to say there was, or it is, or it had. Those are certain to turn off a reader. Now, editing a story. Whether you're writing a story and then going back and rewriting or creating a new draft, or editing someone else's work. For news writing, you need to try to keep your paragraphs to no more than 3 sentences long. When you see things in print, you realize how much space a sentence or two can take up, and long blocks of type tend to discourage readers from continuing. You should also strive to keep your sentences relatively short. As I said, 1 thought per sentence. You get too many thoughts into 1 sentence, you lose your way. Always try to make your sentences the subject, verb, object construction. Those are the easiest to read. They also help people remember facts and details about your stories. Remember to use direct quotes, but use them sparingly. You don't have to just run quote after quote after quote. Quotes make your story more credible. They collaborate with you on what you're trying to say and present in your story. And they're just really good at helping include people, live people in a story. A story that does not have any quotes tends not to be very lively. A common recommendation is to put a powerful quote around your 3rd paragraph. And consider ending your story with an interesting quote. Those are all nice storytelling techniques, but they aren't solid rules that have to be obeyed every time. Just make it useful to the reader and use it when appropriate. A quick word about story forms or story formats. The most common one in newspapers and news presentations is the inverted pyramid. These are the ones that start with such and such happened or so and so said, and then a little bit of answering the who, what, when, where, and why questions in the next few paragraphs. And of course, usually a nice quote that supports the previous information and helps transition to the rest of the story in around the 3rd or 4th paragraph. The original aim for writing in this format was in print days. A story might have to be cut long after the writer and the editor had left the office and the printer was down in the print room putting the story onto the page. And the story would not fit. So the least important information, or information that would not harm the story if it was not in it, would be left at the bottom, hence the inverted pyramid style. And so if the story didn't fit, the writer, the printer rather, would cut it from the bottom. The important thing to remember in editing the story is that you're writing for accuracy You're editing for accuracy and fairness. That means not writing from a first-person point of view. That means not editorializing. That means using the strongest verbs. Finally, a few words about the legal and ethical sides of good editing. Editors should be aware of libel and what constitutes libel. They should also be aware of the proper use of copyrighted information. Not just photos, but photos tend to be one where people run into trouble. Just because you can find it on the internet doesn't mean that a photo is legal to use. And the same thing applies to videos, whether it's video you're using to insert into your own video or music you're using as a soundtrack for your video. Make sure you have legal access to those pieces of information. Also, there are ethical issues, particularly when it comes to photos. Don't manipulate a photo beyond the typical routine cropping or color corrections or lightening or darkening to highlight the image. Finally, don't do what this guy did. He added an image to one image and he deleted an image from another image. It earned him a suspension from his job, and he later was forced to resign. That's it for the editing. I thank you, and let me add one more thing. Please visit spj.org for the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics to learn more about ethical journalism. Thank you.